welcome back to Ascending with Ashley. I'm Ashley. As promised, this is my critical overview of Stranger Things, the entire series that no one asked for, but I'm here to share. This is my, third, because I just started, but I didn't have my rings on, so I paused. So anyway, this is the second time I've done this, but the first time I was out of it a little bit, so I'm redoing it now, and I'm sorry for the delay. Again, no one asked for this, but I think it's important. So I want to talk about a couple things. I want to talk about the structure of the show itself and the themes that come up, and how that is relevant in our day-to-day life now. And I also would like to talk about the impact on society that the show has had. Okay? Let us begin, alright? I've got my water and my protein. Alright. I've got Stranger Things playlist inspired over here, and then after this conversation or whatever, I'm going to do a reading using my new Stranger Things tarot with the shadow work. So we're gonna go into the upside down of our own psyches. All right, so check that out if you'd like. Okay, and let us begin. All right. I want to start with the show itself. If you are not a stranger, if you haven't watched it, I wouldn't watch this. I am going to do spoilers. That's why I waited for the finale, okay? So we're going to talk about the themes first. I thought that so overall, I thought it was a fantastic show. I myself have had history of being locked up and tested on in the mental health facilities and shit, and so I was triggered and also very into what this looked like. If you don't know, Stranger Things is based on true events in the 70s and from like the 40s into the 80s here in the United States, where they were doing MK Ultra. Now, the interesting about this is that I have my master's degree in social justice and human rights, but what I focused on was mental health because of my own journey, and I really wanted to disprove the not only the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, but also the structure of mental health as a form of social control versus how it's kind of given as this, oh, we're here to support you, like it's actually a way to control people. So I found this show very interesting, and I have a very different framework in which I'm watching it and lens that I'm working from, and that's why I'm here doing this. So okay, I just wanted to give you that. So as it was based on actual government stuff, so it was based on the Montauk Project, and the writers, the Duffer Brothers, wanted to name it that initially, but they didn't. But in the season finale, within like the last 30 minutes of the show, there was a mention of Montauk as a place that two of the characters might go. So I thought that I'm gonna start with the finale. The way that they did the finale, I'm a big Harry Potter fan, Lord of the Rings. I love fantasy, magical stuff, right? I really like this. And so for me, the end of this show was phenomenal, but I wasn't emotionally involved like most people were for the past decade. I just started watching it in November, but it did take over my life for a good 8 weeks. So I can't imagine. I mean, I can, because I will talk about that, the impact of society, but I haven't participated in a mass pop culture cult following in a very, very long time. I've been outside of that, so this was the first time in a good 20 years or more that I have, and I've never been doing that with the internet, right? So this was the first time, and it was a learning experience for me that we'll touch on a little bit more. But I just want to cover all of that. I thought it was fantastic. And I loved the way that it ended, where there's a lot of disagreement on that, but I really liked it because they set it up for, they closed chapters enough to allow a finale to happen, but they left enough narratives for each character to make new projects, right? So there's a lot of ways that this show, if they chose to do, Stranger Things again, or a movie, I could definitely see how they were doing that. So you don't get that a lot with all movies. I've also never really participated in a streaming thing like this. You know, with Harry Potter, it was a book first, like a decade before it ever became movies. Um, and then you know, so we knew the ending, right? And so a lot of conversation that's happening online, I know I'm all over the place, I'm very excited about this, but a lot of the things that, well, we'll talk about it when we get over there. I'll write it down. Harry Potter. People are like, is this how you millennials felt? I guess I'll just say it right now. And I'm like, no, because it had a book, so we knew HP reference. So we knew how it was going to end. Okay, so I think a lot of millennials, in the very least, or a lot of like Gen X and millennials, like loved that it took place in the 80s. I would not have liked this show if it was present day at all. I know that. But again, it was based on real historical facts to a certain degree, right? I think that's where I want to start, is the government cover-ups and the way that the government tests on people. I think that the trauma that Elle endured being taken from her mother to become a test subject / weapon is something that nobody is really talking about. And I think it's really important because that's a reality. Now that we are seeing more human trafficking rings being exposed, and how these networks and global trafficking networks and organ harvesting and sex trafficking, I think it's interesting that there hasn't really been a nice, I'm getting like an image of a seatbelt, right? Like, click. There hasn't been a image, or like there hasn't been a connection of that. And I think it's also important to talk about, we're going to come back to that, what I just said, as we talk about the impact of society, especially there was a huge generational conversation happening, which was really fascinating. For those of us who experienced life without the internet in the 80s and 90s, it's very hard for kids now, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, to think about how life was for us. I've seen a lot of the conversation, I know I'm going into the society stuff, but a lot of the conversation about like, your parents didn't like check on you. No, we rode our bikes. We were outside all day, every day, right? So I think it's interesting because now with the internet, these networks and global trafficking, right? Like before, from, you know, the 40s to the 80s, 90s, it was hush hush. It was confidential, you know, government stuff. You know, people are speculating. I mean, people are speculating about every fucking thing with this show. When I love that, because I like thinking about things differently. But a lot of people are like, hey, what if that, like, Area 51 is what they're doing there, right? I'm getting the beginning of Pineapple Express, when they were testing weed, like, in an underground shelter and shit. So, you know, I live out in the desert. There's actually been a really loud boom that's been consistent for the past few months, and nobody in town is talking about it. I mean, people talked about it on Facebook, but nobody ever found out what it is. It was really loud tonight. But anyway, so it makes me think, like, oh, I wonder if they're, like, it sounds like dynamite, like they're clearing, like, you know, mining. I don't know. I don't really want to know because I live here. But, okay, so I think that different themes that I saw was that, especially in the finale, there was this underlying theme of anti-establishment, and I have government equals trash here. So that's very important. I think we're in, you know, we're constantly in these collective waves. And if you think about the waves of the ocean, that's how it feels. Like, we're in these collective waves of consciousness where people are in and out. And, you know, in this moment, this week, like this recent, right now, past, you know, the awakening is on an up right now. People are paying attention to injustice. You know, injustice is a constant. But when people engage with that, when people resist it, it's an important moment to think about, right? And so I think that Stranger Things does a great job of introducing the mistrust of the government and the characters themselves, especially in the very end, like the finale, there's a lot of anti-establishment, and that's also accurate for historically thinking about the 80s. The 80s are when, you know, Bush introduced, like Bush Sr. Introduced, no, it wasn't Bush, it was Reagan. Reagan introduced Reaganomics. They pulled people out, they changed the funding of the mental health system. They pulled money and funding away from community solutions, and they like started this incarceration stuff, right? Deinstitutionalization is what that was called. So there's an interesting overlap there. So it ended up, you know, homeless populations going way up, murder, addiction on the street going way up because this money was defunded. So again, in our current reality, we're experiencing this also. All social services are being defunded, and criminalization. Our, you know, money is going towards surveillance and, you know, militias and shit like that. Like, we're in just such a crazy time right now. But there's definitely overlaps. And I think the thing that I got really frustrated with, again, this is more on the society side of things, so I should hold it off. Let me hold off. Well, no, I'll say it because I have ADHD. I will never come back here. See, I'm already, what was I going to say? Oh, I was annoyed with how people were so obsessed with certain character relationships versus looking at this critically. But I understand that I have a critical understanding of things at a different level, which is why I'm here making this video. I think it's important to make these connections. But I think it was just like, the government is doing this. It was like handed to you, like, the government did this. The government is doing this. This is the government, right? There were so many different factions throughout that show where, like, the government was literally hunting little kids. Fucking crazy. The government opened this portal and created these monsters, and it got out of control. I don't know a lot about, like, the Russia, and I mean, I know a little bit about the Red Scare from, like, the 40s and 50s, just because I learned about, like, McCarthyism, but I don't know a lot about the relationship between Russia and the United States in the 80s. It's not something I've ever been interested in learning about, but this show does touch on that, so I think if you're interested in that, especially in these times, I think it would be, let's go ahead and Google it. I think it would be beneficial to understand, because a lot of people are talking about the three world powers being China, Russia, and the United States right now, as we are finding ourselves at the, I believe we're already in World War III, but as these land grabs and illegal overthrows are happening, Russia and the U.S. relationship in 1980s. The U.S.-Soviet relationship in the 1980s transitioned from an intense Cold War hostility under Reagan, Reagan was president when I was born, and I was born in 87, so, who called the USSR an evil empire, to historic thaw and cooperation with Mikhail Gorbachev's rise. I apologize. Culminating in arms reduction treaties like the INF Treaty and the peaceful end to the Cold War, though tensions over NATO expansion and the Soviet internal issues persisted. Evil empire. President Ronald Reagan labeled the USSR as an evil empire, reflecting deep suspicion and ideological divide. The arms race. The U.S. pursued military buildup, including the Strategic Defense Initiative, increasing Soviet anxiety. Afghanistan. So that was around the nuclear bomb, I'm guessing, right? That's the arms race. Afghanistan and Poland. Soviet actions like the Afghanistan invasion and suppression in Poland further strained relations. The mid to late. Wait, wasn't he president? Was Bush president when I was born? I don't know. I was only born. Mid to late 80s. The Gorbachev. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm going to call it Gore, because I can handle that. Factor. Glasnost and, oh my god, these are Russian words. Perestroika? I don't know these words. Gore reforms aimed to revitalize the Soviet economy, requiring a less confrontational stance with the U.S. Summit diplomacy. Reagan and Gore developed a strong personal rapport, meeting in Geneva in 1985. arms control breakthrough. In 1987, the Washington Summit led to the landmark Intermediate Range Forces nuclear whatever. Yeah. So, okay. Montauk Project. So I've experienced MK Ultra, not to the degree that 11 did, but inside mental institutions, I have been. Mine was more of a. It was like a weird torture. It wasn't really studying me, but it was trying to push me to my limit. The Montauk Project is a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. Is a project that was in the United States government, conducted at Camp Hero in Montauk, New York, for the purpose of developing psychological warfare techniques and exotic research, including time travel. The story of the Montauk Project originated. There's plenty of documentaries, so whenever something says conspiracy theory, remember that that was a term that was coined by Hoover in the midst of the Black Panthers' rise, and it was to delegitimize the resistance, okay? All right, so, little backup. So, okay, so what I really think is important also, so I already talked a little bit about children and oppression. I have mental health and social control. I think I also have time being unlinear because of the way that the upside down was introduced, and also like the whole wormhole thing. The concept of time within the show, like we went on this adventure. I think the thing that's really interesting is that, and this is going into how it feeds into society, is that the audience of this show, if you started it in 2016, had to wait 10 years for the finale. Whereas within the show, it only takes place within like 4 or 5 years. And so I think that when movies and shows, I always think it's a good way to pull the scope back and not get so involved in the show, is to think about the timing that you're watching and what the movie or show is trying to get across time-wise. I think that's a very important thing so that you don't get sucked into the subliminal messaging. But time being very unlinear within this show is very interesting. Like the way that people were emotionally invested in this by the time it was done was insane. And I mean that word. Insane. Okay? I think one of the most important things to touch on is the inner child healing, and the way that this is a show that is whether it was meant to be or not, it's an amazing analogy for doing shadow work, especially for following Vecna, the villain. Especially within the finale, you see his first memory, his bad, like when he chose to be on the bad side. And so I think that's really, I think when he, I think each character has their own shadow work to go through, right? This is very important with Will. He had to deal with queerness and coming out in the midst of the 80s, the AIDS epidemic. I think that the queer movement, I think that how this show took place in the 80s, but how it's being portrayed in this time, in 2025, when Will had his big coming out scene, it was in the last few episodes. The pushback on that, society-wise, was insane. It was either you loved it or you hate it, and I think most of the folks who were queer, we loved it because it resonated with us, or queer or like oppressed in any way. It was a very vulnerable moment that we've all got some sort of resonance within our own queerness, or oppression, whatever that is. I think queerness is an umbrella term for like being different than the status quo, basically. Not necessarily just sexually, but like being different, right? And so I think that children and oppression is an important thing, but also how the characters were able to overcome their own shadows was really cool, especially in the face of such danger, quite frankly, right? And fear. My favorite part of this show was the way that I have friendship, individuality, community, strengths, and roles. I think that my favorite part was how the group kept growing and growing, and like each new person brought on a new role, brought strengths, brought solutions, were able, I loved it. I loved how the characters kept getting kneaded into this core group. And I loved how in each episode, you know, there was a group of 3 here and a group of 2 here, and they're all doing something different without communicating, right? Because there are no cell phones. But they were all able to like get their perspective jobs or, you know, challenges done, so that they all came back together, you know, in each season to overthrow or overcome like the challenge together. I fucking love that. And I think it speaks to our human needs, right? Like, we need community, we need friendship, we all have different roles to play. And I'm gonna cry. I thought it was so beautiful the way that this was portrayed within the show. I thought it was just amazing. My favorite part for sure. I'm definitely crying. I do have ability to overthrow a government and oppressive systems as a very important part here. And I also have military and government corruption, which we already looked into. And then I have guilt, fear, and power, and the balancing of that. There was a lot of those different shadow aspects coming up. Again, not just for the main villain, but for all of the characters. There was a lot of guilt. Vecna himself, the villain, really fed on guilt and fear. And that shadow aspect, right? Doing that inner child healing and shadow work for the characters. You know, coming into their own, being able to express themselves freely, and just having that support system within that little core group was amazing, right? There was a lot of queerness. There was a little bit of racism in there. There was, you know, guilt about, you know, people who abuse you, like wanting them to receive, you know, their karma for that. There was a lot of different themes that I think speak to mental health. Which I have here, mental health and social control. So I fucking love the show, okay? I thought it was really beautiful. Alright, and now we're gonna go on to the society and how I think that this show has impacted society. Again, as someone who is usually not like balls deep in these conversations at a collective level, I usually just avoid these things. I did get into it in a couple different comment threads while we were waiting for the finale, because everybody was just going crazy with their fucking theories, right? Myself included. I do owe Kali an apology. She was not the villain. I thought she was. But to be fair, the writers did portray her character to be some sort of... They let her take on a scapegoat role while people were waiting. So, okay. Let me take a breath. Oh, so I already have a lot of stuff that we've already talked about on here. I have the Pride movement and Edie's history. I think the interesting thing the most, so Byler was there's a whole cult of people who wanted Byler to be a thing, and Byler is this love relationship between Will, one of the main characters, and his friend Mike. But Mike is in a consensual heterosexual relationship the entire show, and so there was a lot of delusion when it came to Byler. There was a lot of, and I think that's the thing that's so fascinating, is because these were people who were invested for the 10 years, and so not only were they just watching the show, but they were, you know, the difference here is that these kids who watch this show, or young adults who started it when they were young and are watching it, is that they have access to the actors and actresses via TikTok and other social media platforms. And as I would never experience this, right? So watching the characters like on TikTok posting and teasing about the end of the show was crazy. We never had that growing up, and so there was a lot of like mind fuckery happening, and it was really intense, right? There was a lot of that. So the Byler thing is important because I think that the queer community was really reaching for that to be people, you know, who resonate with queerness or are gay, really wanted that to be a thing. They wanted, the term queer baiting was like thrown around a lot the past couple weeks, and it wasn't queer baiting, but what it was is this, as a queer person, I can speak to this unrequited love, because Will was in love with Mike, but Mike was straight and in a relationship with Elle, right? And so there was never a consensual love story there, but like Byler, like I said, this group of fans created this entire fantasy world in where Byler was a thing and they were just waiting. So when the finale came around, everyone was like, this sucks, because they like had made up this ending. So again, that's just this cultural divide, because we never got to do that, right? Like, things were already, the older generations, we've just, usually had fucking TV shows up until this point, or movies, right? We've never had this like negotiation space or parasocial relationship space with actors that we are, that are in the middle of making stuff. It's very interesting. So the hive mind is something I want to talk about, because the hive mind was a word or a verbiage that was used within the show to describe the things that are all connected to Vecna, the villain, like the Demogorgons and shit. And I think that the hive mind outside of the show, for the fandom or for the kids, or like the people who were so invested in the show, especially on TikTok, was like the comment sections. There was this insane social shit happening. Again, I got balls deep in this shit over like the past month. And the way that people would like rally each other up in the comments, and I mean, we see this around comments and other social things all the time, but this is just fascinating to me, because again, this show is so much deeper. It's based on true facts of what the government did. And so to see all of this other shit happening, it's insane. So I'm a psychic. So I have a lot of, I don't really practice telekinesis, but I do have different abilities that I really resonated with Elle as the main character. I mean, I haven't practiced telekinesis. I could probably do it if I needed to. But I do have a lot of different psychic abilities. I have been locked up. I have been studied. I have been surveilled. I have been medicated. My behavior has been tracked in many different facilities. And so I really resonated with that. I resonated with how shitty the doctor was, and I'm just shocked that nobody talked about that. Like, Brenner was the main doctor. He's the one that took Elle away from her mother and then like did electroshock therapy to her mother, and like fried her brain, but her mom was still able to reach this psychic space that Elle was able to do. Like, Elle was able to travel in psychic realms. And so it brings in this spiritual aspect, right? And so it's just so fascinating to me that like all of these fighting and like everybody's like duking it out in the comments and like making their guesses, but like it wasn't even making their guesses, it was like, you're wrong. Like, one kid told me I'm wrong and then like guessed that everyone was gonna die, and I'm like, no, it's a TV show, that's not gonna happen. So there were a few things that arose for me that I've been thinking about a lot because of this phenomenology I'm seeing at a societal level around this fucking show. And not only is it a hive mind, but I think it's really interesting because it made me think about, because there was a lot of, not only the Byler thing, but there were a lot of people talking about how misunderstood Vecna was, the villain. And it got me to be like, so I've survived a lot of abusive relationships, and I'm like, wow, there's like this romanticizing of this person. And so that started like all of these other conversations, and it's just interesting. And so I thought it was interesting because some of these kids' language, and I'm saying kids because these are definitely people younger than me, and I know that, but like some of the language was like, oh, well, he killed these kids because like he did this entire massacre within the testing grounds that the government had, right? And I resonate with a couple of the things, just like it's giving like V for Vendetta. If you've never seen that movie, V himself, and again, this is another V, which is interesting. Vecna. But V himself was a test subject for medical testing, and he survived, and he had retaliation against those doctors. I mean, it's kind of a very similar storyline, but again, that's just a movie, and it spoke to, I mean, the goal of V for Vendetta as a movie was revolution. It wasn't gay kids getting together, right? But again, V for Vendetta took place in a futuristic scope, as this is going backwards in the past. But it made me realize that, so these people were like, some people were like, Vecna is misunderstood, and I'm like, okay, so there's a lot of like pedophilia imagery in the last season that we were presented with that was pretty terrifying. And also just the way that he was preying on children. And it was interesting to me that the hive mind of like the fandom were sympathizing with that. And then I'm like, oh, what have they grown up with? They've grown up with a pedophile in charge, right? So like Donald Trump was elected in 2016. He began his first presidency. So thinking that was 10 years ago. So these kids who started watching this shit 10 years ago, I mean, that's a fascinating parallel to make that I haven't seen anyone else talk about, and I don't know, I don't really feel like it on TikTok. But like, Donald Trump is a pedophile. Donald Trump has done horrible things. Donald Trump preys on children. And so it's interesting, and it's just interesting seeing, again, if we pull our scope way back, you know, a lot of the comments and some of the things I said, people are like, it's just a TV show, but like, I watch everything critically. I have my bachelor's in communication. I love watching shit critically. I don't just consume things to be entertained. I always look for deeper meaning. But anyway, I thought it was really interesting to think about how these kids were experiencing that show. Again, for those of us who grew up in the 90s and 80s, it was very nostalgic for us. We loved it. It was an adventure, right? We grew up on this shit. Never-Ending Story, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, the Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, all of these other adventures. Star Wars, fuck. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., like, those are big 80s movies that were all about, like, supernatural shit and, like, government conspiracy. We love this shit, right? And so it's just, it was a completely, there's a huge generational gap that happened amongst viewers, which is, you know, and a lot of us older folks chimed in on that of, like, and I've already spoken on those, like, the parasocial relationships, having access to your actors. I mean, when we were growing up, actors were, like, they were totally off limits. The only access we had to actors were through magazines. We did not have social media. And so it's fascinating to see this shift in society within this. And it's also, it's disturbing because, you know, for someone to say something like, oh, well, he killed the kids because, I was like, wow, you're excusing, like, this huge massacre. And then I'm like, oh, school shootings are excused all the time. Like, these kids are growing up in a completely different reality than us, right? And so I also have here how the internet coddles mass psychosis, which I already kind of touched on for the hive mind in the comment sections, and, like, the way that people were creating narratives. So a couple things as an, you know, being all done with this. Thanks for listening. I've been really hyped on this. And it was a lot messier last time. So, remember that the government is trash, okay? The ability to overthrow the government and oppressive systems is possible. And I think that's another thing is, like, the kids were saying, like, oh, that's not realistic. Like, they were, like, really taking bets on, like, who is going to die. And for those of us who are, like, you know, the Goonies too, right? Like, Sean Astin having, like, a guest appearance, or it wasn't really a cameo. He was there for a whole season. But to have Sean Astin in this show was phenomenal, right? Like, he was the Goonie. Mikey from the Goonies, Samwise Gamgee, fucking Encino Man and shit. Like, I love Sean Astin so much, and so I was really happy to see him in this show. Winona Ryder also has always been on the outskirts of Hollywood. And she's always been eccentric, and so the casting was phenomenal. I fell in love with Robin, which I didn't know, but she's Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke's daughter, and Uma Thurman was in Kill Bill, like, phenomenal. So Kill Bill is also, if you haven't seen that, it's about vengeance as well. And so the casting was phenomenal. Dustin was my favorite. I don't remember Gayton, is that his name? But I think it's because he kind of looks like Niall, because Niall's missing his front teeth and he's got curly hair. But I appreciated all of the cast. But I love the show. I love it. And I had a friend who had been watching it the whole 10 years, and she's the one that like got me to watch it. And she was like, I can't believe it's over. And I'm like, okay, it's over, but now you can watch all the seasons whenever you want, like, it's a form of artwork. And so again, there was this very interesting navigation of reality and the show. But even that, I'm getting upside down, which is what that space was called in the show. A lot of that shit was weird. I have no desire to be a part of another like cult following in real time. Not while social media is still around. But yeah, so that is my take on it. I thought it was amazing. But remember that the government did do this shit. The government does test on people. I'm one of those people. That's why I resonate with lead characters who call for revolution all the time. Hunger Games, I'm getting Hunger Games again about childhood and oppression. But I think that it shed a lot of light for me on the current reality of the generations right now. And I did lose a little bit of hope in humanity, and I kind of realized how fucked we are. But again, that's the space we've created for those kids, for those generations. Again, the school shootings, Donald Trump, forgiving pedophilia. These kids have access to watching genocide and porn and all this other shit, right? Like, the third space that used to be real life for us, nature, riding our bikes, going to the upside down, has become the internet. And that is a scary reality. So, yeah. I don't want to leave you on a harsh note, but my bad. I thought it was phenomenal. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. It's wonderful. It's very well thought out. I thought that, so many people were really reaching these past couple weeks before the finale came out for a much darker ending. Much more, not vengeance, much more, what's that word? Like deep betrayal. Like, there was a lot of hope for like deep betrayal in that core group that I talked about. And so to not, it was a fairly happy ending. The villain died, everybody else lived except for the main character. But even her death, there was a little bit of martyrism. Eddie was my favorite. That's why I got a Hellfire Club. Eddie was a martyr, and I love that. I really liked Eddie's character. My favorite part was when he's hiding out and they like go to see him, and Dustin's like, we have good news and we have bad news, and he's like got his cereal box and his Yoo-hoo, and he was like, and they were like, which one do you want first? And he was like, bad news always. I was like, yes. That was my favorite. I really love Robin. It was just a beautiful story. It took me a while to get over like the creepiness, because I'm very creeped out by the Demogorgons and all of the weird shit, but overall it was fantastic. So thanks for being here. Fuck the government. Have a good one. Bye.